Welcome back to Movement Professional. So this video is in response to some questions I've had regarding recovering from a hamstring injury. So I wanted to break this down into a progressive sequence in which we can assess symptoms depending on how acute the injury is, and as you're starting to get farther from the initial onset of the injury, some things that you can test out to see where you are and what you're ready for. All right, so the first thing I would look at if you are having a pretty new injury, if there's a lot of sensitivity there, is that we would do progressive isometrics. So there's two different types of isometrics that we can look at. The first one would be a bent knee isometric, and then the second would be a straight knee isometric. So for the bent knee isometric, we can get something like a bench. And generally the bent knee isometric will be less strenuous. It'll be easier to test out early on because we take some tension out of the hamstring down at the knee. So we're just going to start in this 90-90 position, and what we want to think about first is just gently, and think about your isometrics as a volume knob that you're slowly turning up, not an on-off switch where it's as hard as you can or not at all. So you want to be able to turn that volume knob off by pressing the heels down. You could even think about the back pockets going to the back of the knees, or the sit bones going to the back of the knees, which is the proximal attachment of the hamstring. So I want to ramp that up, and I just want to see if I'm promoting any discomfort. And I'm going to, even if I have a single-sided injury, I'm going to do this on both sides at first, just so I can have a little bit more feedback for symmetry and stability. So I'll feel the back of my belt into the ground, heels gently pushing into the bench, trying to do a little bit of an idea of a pelvic tilt where the sit bones go to the back of the knees. And I'm just going to ramp that up, and in my head I'm thinking 0 out of 10, 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, etc. And finding, can I go all the way to 10 out of 10 without any discomfort? If I can, then I've sort of cleared that stage to say, all right, at least I can do this, and I can actually start building hamstring strength without pain in this position. If that feels decently easy and I have no pain with that whatsoever, then I'm going to start to add a little bit of a lift. So I'm thinking about the sit bones going to the back of the knees. I'm adding a little bit of height, and I'm going to go up as high as I can, and then I'm going to come down very slow. So I start then moving into slow tempo, active range of motion, and I want to see how that feels. If at any point I feel pain, I just stop at that point. I say, like, that's what I'm ready for today, and I go back to the stage before it. All right, once I can clear that, then I can go into a single leg version, or actually before that, I'll even just do a hip shift where I start to bias one side versus the other. So if I want to bias my left hamstring here, I think about reaching my right knee a little bit higher than my left. Just by doing that, it shifts my weight to my left back pocket or the left back of my belt, and then I feel heaviness in this hamstring so that my isometric gets a little bit more biased to the left side. If I want to do that to my right, I think about my left knee getting a little bit higher, my right knee coming into the socket a little bit more, feel the right back of the belt more into the ground. Now I feel this right side a little bit more, and I can then take the essence of that shift and add a little bit of a lift down and up, and I see how just that bias to one side feels. Am I ready for that? And then the last piece would be I add the shift, I hover the heel, so now I'm completely on one leg, do the isometric first, ramp that up, make sure I can go all the way to about a 10 out of 10, and then I bring some active movement into the mix, and I see if I'm ready for that. So that would be my sequence of assessment with slow movement with the bent knee isometric. So for the straight knee isometrics, and then eventually I can add a straight knee bridging into this situation, I'm going to use a pole or a door frame, and I'm going to slowly straighten my leg, because just if this is really sensitive, just getting the leg to straight, you're going to feel the tension there, which will create some irritation. So this is definitely going to be a little trickier than the bent knee version, so we're going to have to be a lot more gentle. So I may have to be farther away from the post at first, and then I'll find out where the stretch aspect of getting the hamstring or getting the knee straight, where does that come on and provoke symptoms. If I'm okay with that pressure or with that stretch, then I can start adding some isometrics into the post, very gentle, turning the range of motion, turning the intensity up very slowly, pushing the heel into the post, feeling the back of the belt heavy into the ground. All right, and then I'm releasing, seeing if I can get a little bit closer over time. So my goal is to be able to put the sit bone or the back of my thigh on the post with this leg straight, feel the stretch, and create pressure close to a 10 out of 10 into the post without pain. And it really depends on what your pre-injury range of motion was, but getting yourself pretty close to that pre-injury range of motion with pressure through there. But that's going to be a much more gradual process than what you're experiencing with the bent knee version. If I can get this to be a 10 out of 10, then I can start doing a version of a bridge where I'm not going to expect to get very high, but I'm just going to push into the pillar enough to lift my hip off, just to see that adds extra strength, extra force into the hamstring there, and I want to see if I can tolerate that. But I don't do that unless I can tolerate a 10 out of 10 effort into the post first, and then I can just sort of think, push into the post, add a little bit of a butt lift and a hip lift there. All right, so that would be using the straight leg, and that's the progression that I would go through. Once I've cleared all of that and I feel like I can do the isometrics, I can do the little bit of lift, then I'm going to start to look at adding a little bit of velocity into the mix. And that's usually one of the hardest things to get back, especially if you're doing some type of athletic endeavor where you actually have to use a little bit more speed and force in your contractions. Then what we can start to look at is get the bent knee version back into play. And we start with coming up slow, bring it down, and then as soon as the butt touches, back up quickly. And being able to test that on two legs, add the shift in, down slow, pop up, shift it to the left or shift it to the right, then hover the foot, up, down, pop up, pop up. And even the speed in which we add that pop is turned up in the same way that we turn up the isometric. So it's not going from 0 to 100, it's 20%, 30%, etc. We're trying to do that gradually, and we're testing then the speed, and then we would do the same thing with the straight leg version. Once all that feels pretty clear, then we can do some higher end things like try some Nordic hamstring. The typical Nordic hamstring curl is to think of just falling and bringing yourself back up. What I like to do is incorporate a ball into the mix just so that there's a little bit more guidance on the way down, and we could actually then make this a little bit more gradual in the process. So to work on this, we start up high. We get the idea of the sit bones, which is again the top attachment of the hamstring, sit bones to the back of the knees, and then you're going to just gently and slowly fall using the ball to help you roll into a version of a plank position. So now you got the heels pushing up underneath, engaging the hamstrings. You're tucking the sit bones still, and then you just try to engage the abs, make it harder by flattening out a bit. And then you're going to use the hamstrings to pull yourself back up. So you test that out very slowly at first, so you get a sense of, all right, can I tolerate this deceleration, this fall forward? And then eventually the fall gets a little quicker, so you can catch yourself with your hamstring, still trying to keep the proximal idea of keeping the pelvis tucked or the sit bones to the back of the knees. All right, you don't want the butt to go back that way. That just moves everything down to the lower part of the hamstring, so that there's a sense of fall, catch yourself with the hamstring, so then the falling process is guided by the ball, and then we try to fall faster and faster and see if the hamstrings can tolerate that. If that feels pain-free, that's a very good exercise to get you almost better than you were before, because most people aren't training these things to make their hamstrings more robust. So I would say a version of the Nordic hamstring curl with a more aggressive fall, that becomes your end stage hamstring. And then just whatever it is you're doing, playing your sport, doing jiu-jitsu, making sure that you can get back to those activities gradually at first. So gradually meaning try not to go high velocity until you've tested out high velocity outside of the sport, but then you're going to have to go and turn up and ramp it up, and eventually you'll have to get back to playing. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment. See you next time.